champagne glasses shattered against marble floors. Nobody breathed. 100 of the city's most dangerous elites turned into statues the second Dick Encosta's voice cut through the ballroom. He didn't yell. He didn't pull a weapon. He just stood by the grand staircase, his dark eyes locked on the man gripping Carmela's wrist. "Get away from her," he said quietly. That whisper hit the room harder than a gunshot, and every single person knew someone was about to die. Music drifted down from the balcony quartet, entirely out of place among the predators in tuxedos. Carmela hated this room. She hated the way the crystal chandeliers threw harsh, unforgiving light on the diamond-studded collars of women who looked like expensive pets, and the men who held their leashes. This was the annual gala for the Brighton Foundation, a charity that existed solely on paper to wash the money of men who made their fortunes in the dark. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, balancing silver trays of beluga caviar and glasses of vintage Krug. Nobody actually ate. Food was a prop. The real consumption happening here was power. Carmela stood near a towering arrangement of white lilies, trying to blend into the shadows. Her dress was black, silk, and borrowed. It pinched her ribs. Every time she inhaled, the fabric dug into her skin, a constant reminder that she did not belong in this ecosystem. She was a tourist in a war zone, dragged here by a man whose ego was vastly larger than his actual influence. Victor Dempsey. He was currently 3 feet away, laughing too loudly at a joke told by a city alderman. Victor was a mid-level enforcer who had recently come into a modest amount of money and an immodest amount of ambition. He wore his tailored Italian suit like armor, though it didn't quite hide the cheap, nervous energy radiating from him. Carmela was his +1. More accurately, she was his collateral. Her older brother, an idiot with a penchant for high-stakes poker and terrible odds, owed Victor $50,000. Victor had told Carmela she could work off the interest by being his arm candy for the season. She took a sip of her sparkling water. The ice clinked softly against the glass. Carmela was a pragmatist. She worked as an auditor for a logistics firm, a job entirely composed of finding anomalies in spreadsheets. She understood debts, margins, and ledgers. This arrangement with Victor was just another ledger. Keep her head down, smile when spoken to, let him parade her around to prove he could land a woman who looked like her, and eventually the debt would clear. It was a cynical way to view a year of her life, but cynicism was a shield. Hope got people killed in her neighborhood. Pragmatism kept them fed. "You look bored," a voice rasped near her ear. Carmela flinched, instinctively stepping back, her shoulder bumping the heavy ceramic vase of the lily arrangement. Victor stood there, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cheap mints. His eyes were slightly unfocused, a red flush creeping up his thick neck. He was drinking too fast. In a room full of apex predators, the worst thing you could do was dull your senses. "I'm fine, Victor," Carmela said evenly. She kept her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Just admiring the architecture. Don't give me that dead fish routine," he muttered, stepping into her space. He reached out, his thick fingers brushing the bare skin of her shoulder. His touch wasn't affectionate. It was proprietary. "You're supposed to be making me look good. Smile a little. Go mingle with the wives. Find out what Alderman Reed's wife is whining about." "I don't think she wants to talk to me. I didn't ask what you thought." Victor's jaw tightened. He glanced around the room, assessing who was watching him. In this world, perception was reality. If he looked weak with his woman, he looked weak with his business. Carmela followed his gaze. The ballroom was a sea of shifting alliances, men shaking hands while mentally calculating the cost of a hit on one another. Women exchanging air kisses laced with poison. And then she saw him. Dickon Costa didn't stand out because he was loud. He stood out because he was entirely still. He was seated in a high-backed leather chair near the far corner of the room, a glass of amber liquid resting on his knee, while the rest of the room vibrated with the frantic energy of networking and survival. Dickon sat with the relaxed posture of a man who owned the building, the land beneath it, and the lives of everyone standing inside. He was in his late 30s, his dark hair threaded with premature silver at the temples. His face was a geography of hard lines and quiet authority. He didn't wear a tie. The top 2 buttons of his charcoal dress shirt were undone, a subtle but glaring defiance of the black tie dress code. Nobody was going to tell Dickon Costa he was underdressed. Carmela watched as an older man, a reputed union boss, approached Dickon. The older man actually bowed his head slightly before speaking. Dickon didn't stand. He merely nodded, said 2 words, and the union boss walked away, looking visibly relieved. "Stop staring," Victor hissed, grabbing Carmela's elbow. His grip was entirely too tight. "I wasn't staring," Carmela lied, though she winced as his fingers dug into her ulnar nerve. "That's Costa," Victor said, his voice dropping to a nervous whisper. "You don't look at him. You don't breathe his air. He carved out half the city's port authority before he was 30. He's not someone you make eye contact with." Carmela looked back at Victor. The sheer terror in his eyes was pathetic. For all his bluster with her, Victor was terrified of the real monsters in the room. It gave her a fleeting sense of superiority, quickly crushed by the sharp pain in her elbow. "Let go, Victor. You're hurting me." "I'll let go when you start acting like you're worth the dress I bought you," he sneered, pulling her closer. "Now come on, Reed is going to the bar, and I need a moment with him." He yanked her forward. Carmela stumbled, the heels of her borrowed shoes catching on the edge of an oriental rug. She caught her balance, but the water in her glass sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the pristine sleeve of Victor's suit jacket. Time seemed to slow down. Victor stopped walking. He looked at his wet sleeve, and then he looked at Carmela. The thin veneer of high society manners evaporated from his face, replaced by the ugly, brutal thug he actually was. Silence doesn't fall. It spreads. It starts at an epicenter and ripples outward until it drowns an entire room. Tonight, the epicenter was Victor Dempsey. "You stupid bitch," Victor growled. His voice stayed low, but the venom carried. He dropped his shattered glass onto the marble. Before Carmela could blink, his massive hand wrapped entirely around her slender wrist. He twisted, forcing her arm up and behind her back in a swift, practiced arc. A sharp gasp tore through Carmela's teeth. The pain was white-hot, shooting directly into her shoulder socket. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. Crying would validate him. Crying would make him feel big, and she refused to give him the satisfaction. "Victor, stop," she breathed, keeping her gaze locked on his lapels. "Everyone is looking." "Let them look," he spat. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He realized he had made a scene, but his fragile ego wouldn't let him retreat. Backing down meant showing weakness in a room that fed on it. He tightened his grip, twisting a fraction of an inch further. "You embarrass me in front of these people. I'll break this arm. You understand? Carmela's vision blurred at the edges. The string quartet on the balcony sounded disjointed, like a skipping record. The alderman and his wife took 2 steps back, their faces sliding into carefully practiced neutrality. In their world, you didn't intervene. You let the dogs tear each other apart and shook hands with the winner. A sickening wave of helplessness crashed over her. Her pragmatism had failed. She had thought keeping her head down would be enough, but she had vastly underestimated the brittle nature of Victor's pride. "I understand," she whispered. "Just let go." "I don't think you do," Victor began, his chest puffing out. "Get away from her." The voice wasn't a shout. It barely qualified as a command. It was delivered with the casual, quiet cadence of a man remarking on the weather. But it paralyzed the room. Up on the balcony, the cellist's bow dragged across the strings with a discordant screech. A waiter halfway across the room froze mid-step. The low, collective hum of 100 conversations died instantly. Victor stopped breathing. His grip on Carmela's wrist remained, but the brutal pressure ceased. Carmela turned her head, fighting through the agonizing throb in her shoulder. Dickon Costa had stood up. He didn't march across the room. He just walked. Each step was measured, silent on the oriental rugs, echoing faintly when his leather shoes found the marble. The crowd parted for him on instinct. Women in silk gowns pressed themselves against their husbands to ensure they were completely out of his path. It was like watching the tide recede before a tsunami. Carmela watched him close the distance. Up close, the silver at his temples caught the harsh chandelier light. His eyes were the color of cold black tea, and they weren't looking at her. They were fixed dead center on Victor's flushed face. Victor was vibrating. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Mr. Costa, it's a private matter. She's with me." Dickon stopped 3 feet away. He slipped his hands into the pockets of his tailored trousers. He looked down at Victor's hand, still wrapped awkwardly around Carmela's arm. "I'll say it one more time," Dickon said. A low rumble, completely devoid of anger. That lack of emotion was precisely what made it terrifying. There was nothing for Victor to bargain with. "Get away from her." "Dickon, listen. This stupid girl owes me." Dickon moved faster than Carmela's eyes could track. 1 second his hands were pocketed. The next, his left hand clamped onto Victor's thick throat. He slammed the heavier man backward against a marble pillar. The impact violently rattled the nearest chandelier. Victor released Carmela instantly. His hands flew up, clawing frantically at Dickon's wrists. Carmela stumbled forward, cradling her aching arm against her ribs. She dragged in a ragged breath, dizzy from the sudden release of pressure. The ballroom remained entirely silent. 100 guests watched the most powerful man in the city casually strangle a mid-level thug. No security intervened. No one reached for a phone. Dickon leaned in close. "You don't raise your voice in this room," he whispered. His grip tightened just enough to make Victor's eyes bulge. "You don't break glass on my floor, and you don't put your hands on a woman like a drunken coward." Victor choked out a wet, gurgling sound. His face morphed into a mottled shade of plum. "You're a guest at my foundation's event," Dickon continued, his tone perfectly conversational. "You brought dirt into my house, Dempsey. You're dirtying my air." He held Victor there for exactly 3 more seconds, long enough for Victor's knees to buckle, forcing his entire body weight to hang suspended from Dickon's grip. Then he let go. Victor collapsed. He gasped frantically, tearing at his own collar as he sucked down oxygen. He scrambled backward like a crab, desperate to get away from Dickon's shoes. Dickon pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his back pocket. He slowly wiped the palm that had held Victor's neck, then dropped the fabric onto Victor's heaving chest. "Walk out the back doors," Dickon said, looking down. "If I see your face in this city after tomorrow morning, I'll have you fed to the dogs at the scrapyard. Nod if you understand." Victor, crying openly now, nodded violently. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the service exit, abandoning his coat, his pride, and his entire life in the city. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him. Dickon turned around. He didn't address the crowd. He merely looked up at the balcony and pointed a single finger at the quartet. Within 2 seconds, Vivaldi resumed. The room exhaled. The volume started low, a frantic murmuring, before rising back to the standard hum of a gala. The natural order was restored. Dickon finally turned his gaze to Carmela. She expected a smirk. She expected the arrogant gaze of a savior demanding gratitude. Instead, he just looked exhausted. "Are you broken?" he asked. "No, just bruised." "Good." He gave her a brief, sweeping assessment, taking in the cheap shoes and ill-fitting dress. "Walk with me to the car. We're leaving." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Dickon paused. A flicker of genuine amusement crossed his dark eyes. He leaned in slightly. He smelled like expensive wool and a faint hint of peppermint. "Miss," he said quietly, "I just exiled the man holding your leash. By the rules of the people in this room, they think I own you now. If I leave you here, 3 different capos will try to take you home tonight just to spite me. You can stay, or you can walk out those front doors with me right now. Choose in the next 4 seconds." Carmela looked at the crowd. A few men were already watching her over the rims of their glasses, hungry, calculating looks. She looked back at Dickon Costa, a monster, yes, but a pragmatic one. "I need my coat," she said. "Leave it," Dickon replied, turning toward the exit. "I'll buy you a better one." The air outside the Brighton Foundation was freezing, a sharp November wind biting through the thin silk of Carmela's dress. She shivered violently the moment the glass doors shut behind them, her teeth clicking together. Dickon didn't say a word. He didn't do the gentlemanly thing of taking off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. Carmela appreciated that. The chivalry would have felt like a lie, a performance. Instead, he just walked faster. A sleek, heavily armored black SUV sat idling at the curb. A man built like a brick wall stood by the rear passenger door. As Dickon approached, the man opened it without a word. "Get in," Dickon said, gesturing with his chin. Carmela hesitated for a fraction of a second. The rational part of her brain screamed that getting into an armored vehicle with the head of the Costa family was statistical suicide. But standing on the sidewalk waiting for an Uber while Victor's associates were potentially watching felt infinitely worse. She gathered the skirt of her borrowed dress and slid into the deep leather seats. The interior smelled like rich leather and stale coffee. It felt deeply ordinary, jarringly disconnected from the mythos of the man getting in next to her. Dickon slid in, pulling the heavy door shut with a solid, echoing thud that sealed them inside a soundproof vault. "Drive," Dickon told the driver. The SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb. Carmela pressed herself against the door, putting as much space as possible between herself and Dickon. She watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. For the first 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with adrenaline and unspoken questions. Carmela watched him out of the corner of her eye. Dickon wasn't looking at her. He had unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned his head back against the headrest, and closed his eyes. The harsh lines of his face relaxed slightly, making him look less like a warlord and more like a tired accountant at the end of tax season. He reached blindly into the center console, pulled out a plastic bottle of water, and tossed it into her lap. Carmela caught it awkwardly. "Thanks." "You're shaking," he said, keeping his eyes closed. "Hydration helps with adrenaline crashes." Carmela unscrewed the cap and took a sip. The water was lukewarm, but it grounded her. She rolled the plastic bottle between her palms. "Why did you do it?" Dickon opened his eyes. He turned his head slowly, assessing her in the dim streetlights that filtered through the heavy tint. "Do what?" "Throw Victor out, end his life in the city, over me." Carmela held his gaze. "I'm not stupid, Mr. Costa. Men like you don't start wars over women you don't know." "What was the point?" Dickon chuckled. It was a dry, scraping sound, entirely devoid of joy. "Men like me." "And what kind of man is that, exactly?" "A pragmatic one," Carmela said firmly. "You don't waste resources. Victor owed people. He earned for people. Exiling him causes a disruption in your own supply chain. It's bad business, and you struck me as a man who cares deeply about business." Dickon stared at her for a long moment. He shifted slightly in his seat, resting his elbow on the armrest and rubbing his jaw. "You're an auditor." Carmela froze. The water bottle suddenly felt very cold in her hands. "How do you know that?" "I know the name and occupation of every person who walks into my ballroom. It's how I stay alive," Dickon said, his tone casual. "Carmela Rivera, 27, you work for Mercer Logistics. Your brother Thomas is a degenerate gambler who got in deep with Dempsey. Dempsey thought he hit the lottery by forcing you into a dress and parading you around as a trophy." Carmela swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. "If you know all that, then you know I'm a nobody. So I ask again, why cause a disruption?" Dickon sighed, running a hand through his hair. The perfectly coiffed style fell apart, leaving him looking rougher, more human. Dempsey was an idiot. He got lucky on a few low-level extortion rackets, and suddenly he thought he was John Gotti. The disruption you're talking about, it was already happening. He was skimming from his own crew. He was sloppy. If I didn't get rid of him tonight, he would have brought the feds down on a dozen guys who actually know how to earn. Carmela processed this. The cynical truth of it clicked into place perfectly. I was an excuse. "You were an opportunity," Dickon corrected quietly. "He assaulted you in my house. It gave me the public justification to remove him without having to sit down with a commission and argue over numbers. He broke the rules of hospitality. It makes his removal a matter of honor, rather than a hostile takeover." Carmela looked down at her hands. The relief she felt was confusing. She wasn't a damsel in distress who had won the Dark King's heart. She was a convenient pawn in a corporate restructuring that happened to involve guns. It made perfect sense. It was safe. "I see," Carmela said, her voice steady. "Well, thank you for the opportunity." Dickon's lips twitched upward in a fractional smile. "You're very welcome, Miss Rivera. So what happens now?" Carmela asked, looking back out the window. They were heading away from the wealthy downtown district. moving toward the industrial edges of the city where the warehouses stood like dark, sleeping giants. "Victor is gone. Does my brother's debt transfer to you?" Dickon laughed. A real, sudden sound that startled the driver, who glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. "Your brother's debt was $50,000, Dickon said, wiping a bit of moisture from the corner of his eye. "Carmela, I make $50,000 while I'm brushing my teeth in the morning. I couldn't care less about Thomas's poker losses." "Then why am I in this car?" Dickon stopped laughing. He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes returned, pinning her to the leather seat. "Because Dempsey is stupid, but he isn't completely incompetent. He knows he can't touch me, but he is a petty, wounded animal. If I left you there, or if I dropped you off at your apartment tonight, he would send someone to break your legs just to send a message to me." Carmela felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Her pragmatism couldn't shield her from the sheer, brutal reality of the world she had brushed against. "So I'm supposed to just hide?" "For a few days," Dickon said, his voice dropping into a lower, soothing cadence. It was the tone a handler uses to calm a panicked horse. "I have a safe house in the North End. Nobody knows about it. It's boring. The Wi-Fi is terrible, and the fridge is mostly stocked with frozen pizza. But nobody will look for you there." "And my job? You have the flu," Dickon said simply. "A very bad strain. My people have already sent an email from your account to your supervisor. You'll be back at your spreadsheets by Monday." Carmela stared at him. The level of control he exerted over the world around him was suffocating. He didn't ask. He arranged. He didn't converse. He informed. "You act like you're doing me a favor," Carmela said, anger finally piercing through her fear. "But you used me to fire a guy, and now you're locking me up so your PR doesn't take a hit if I get killed." Dickon didn't flinch at her anger. He absorbed it. He tilted his head, watching the fire in her eyes with a quiet, detached appreciation. "I act like a man who just kept you from getting your arm snapped in half by a drunk," Dickon said softly. "I'm not a good man, Carmela. I've never claimed to be. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a very short, very painful future. I suggest you get comfortable with the frozen pizza." The car hit a pothole, jarring them both. Carmela looked away, staring into the dark streets. The worst part wasn't that he was kidnapping her for her own safety. The worst part was that she knew he was entirely, undeniably right. Gravel crunched beneath the heavy tires of the SUV as it pulled into a narrow, unpaved driveway. Carmela peered through the tinted glass, squinting against the harsh glare of a lone street lamp. Dickon had not lied. The safe house was violently unremarkable. It was a single-story brick structure, sitting on a street lined with identical, tired-looking homes. The lawn was overgrown, weeds choking the concrete walkway, and the front porch light flickered with a dying bulb. It looked exactly like a place where nothing important ever happened. The driver pulled into an attached garage, killing the engine only after the heavy wooden door rolled shut and sealed them in total darkness. Dickon opened his door, triggering the SUV's interior dome light. "We're here." Carmela unbuckled her seatbelt and followed him into the house. The interior was aggressively beige. Beige carpets, beige walls, a beige microfiber sofa that looked like it had been bought at a discount furniture outlet in the late 90s. The air felt stale, smelling strongly of lemon floor cleaner and old dust. She stood in the center of the small living room, wrapping her arms around herself. The chill of the November night still clung to her skin. The borrowed black silk dress, which had felt like armor in the ballroom, now just felt thin and absurd. "Thermostat is on the wall behind you," Dickon said. He shrugged off his charcoal suit jacket and tossed it onto the back of the cheap sofa, instantly making the furniture look ridiculous. He walked into the adjacent kitchen, his heavy shoes clicking on the yellowed linoleum, and opened the refrigerator. "I told you about the pizza. There's also some bottled water and half a loaf of bread. The pantry has coffee." "You're staying?" Carmela asked, her voice tight. Dickon shut the fridge and leaned against the counter. He looked at her, his dark eyes taking in her rigid posture, her bare arms, the way she refused to let her teeth chatter. "No, I have a mess to clean up. Victor's crew needs to be absorbed or dismantled by morning. I just needed to make sure you were secured behind a locked door." Carmela nodded slowly. She turned and walked over to the thermostat, pushing the plastic dial up. The furnace kicked on almost immediately, with a loud metallic clank that made her flinch. Dickon watched her. "It does that. You'll get used to it." "I don't plan on being here long enough to get used to it." "Pragmatic," he murmured. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a cheap plastic flip phone, tossing it onto the kitchen counter. It slid and hit the edge of the sink. "That rings. You answer it. It will only be me. Don't look out the windows. Don't order food delivery. Don't open the door for anyone. If the house catches fire, you go out the back door and walk 3 blocks north to the diner on 5th Street. You order a black coffee and you wait for my men. What if my brother tries to call me? Your brother's phone is currently being monitored by men who are very angry about losing their boss," Dickon stated flatly, crossing his arms over his chest. "If Thomas needs you, he'll leave a voicemail. If he's in trouble, I'll know before you do." Carmela rubbed her eyes. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the ballroom was finally burning away, leaving behind a crushing, hollow exhaustion. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache where Victor had wrenched it. She looked down at her feet and kicked off the borrowed heels, letting them clatter onto the floor. She didn't care if it looked unprofessional. She just wanted to feel the ground. Dickon stepped away from the counter. He walked past her, stopping just long enough to glance down at her bruised wrist. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer a word of comfort. "Lock the door behind me." He didn't wait for a reply. He opened the door to the garage and stepped through, the heavy deadbolt clicking solidly into place a second later. Carmela stood alone in the silence of the beige house. The furnace hummed loudly beneath her feet. She looked at the sofa. Dickon had left his suit jacket. She walked over and picked it up. It was heavy, lined with dark silk, and smelled faintly of peppermint and expensive dry cleaning chemicals. It was easily worth more than her car. Carmela hesitated for a fraction of a second before wrapping it around her shivering shoulders. It swallowed her entirely, dropping down to her thighs, but it was incredibly warm. She walked to the front door, checked the locks twice, and sat down on the floor with her back against the solid wood. She didn't cry. Crying was a useless expenditure of energy, and it wouldn't fix the ledger of her life. She just pulled his jacket tighter, tucked her knees to her chest, and waited for morning. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the cheap plastic blinds covering the living room windows. Carmela woke with a sharp, stabbing ache in her neck. She had fallen asleep on the floor by the front door, a terrible tactical decision for her spine. She stood up slowly, her joints popping in protest. Dickon's jacket slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the beige carpet. She picked it up, folded it meticulously, and placed it on the kitchen counter next to the burner phone. The house was dead quiet. Carmela moved into the small kitchen. She found the coffee in the pantry, a cheap, generic brand stored in a plastic tub that smelled like burnt dirt. She brewed a pot anyway, using the ancient drip machine on the counter. Caffeine was a biological necessity, not a luxury. By noon, the boredom had mutated into a physical weight pressing on her chest. Carmela paced the small living room, counting her steps. 12 steps from the front door to the kitchen threshold, 8 steps across the kitchen. She was a woman who thrived on structure, on finding order in chaos. Sitting in a beige box while a turf war potentially raged outside was fundamentally opposed to her nature. She needed data. She needed a task to ground her mind. Carmela began searching the house. She wasn't snooping for secrets. She just needed tools. In a drawer beneath the bulky television, she found a stack of old takeout menus, a heavy metal flashlight with dead batteries, and a half-empty spiral notebook. She grabbed the notebook and rummaged through her small evening bag until she found a ballpoint pen. Sitting at the wobbly kitchen table, Carmela opened the notebook to a blank page and began to draw columns. Assets, liabilities, risk variables. She treated her current situation exactly like a failing corporate merger. Asset: she was alive. She was hidden. She had a direct line to the man pulling the strings. Liability: Victor Dempsey was angry, humiliated, and exiled. Her brother Thomas was a wild card who owed money. Risk variable: Dickon Costa. She tapped the pen against her bottom lip, staring at his name written in blue ink. Dickon was the biggest anomaly in her spreadsheet. Men in his position didn't operate on charity. They operated on leverage, terror, and profit margins. He had used her brilliantly to justify Victor's exile, securing a business asset without triggering an all-out war with his peers. But keeping her safe cost him resources. This house cost money. The burner phone, the time spent thinking about her. It all required a fraction of his attention that he should be dedicating to securing his newly acquired territory. She did not provide a return on this investment, so why expend the capital? The plastic burner phone on the counter buzzed violently, vibrating against the linoleum. Carmela jumped, her pen skidding across the page and drawing a sharp line through Dickon's name. She took a deep breath, walked over to the counter, and picked up the device. She flipped it open and held it to her ear. She didn't say hello. "Did you sleep?" Dickon's voice was a low rumble through the cheap speaker. He sounded exhausted, his words slightly rougher around the edges than they had been last night. "On the floor," Carmela replied, leaning against the counter. The sofa looked biologically questionable. A brief, raspy sound that might have been a laugh filtered through the receiver. "I'll have my interior designer shot. Are you hungry? I ate a slice of frozen pepperoni pizza for breakfast. It tasted like cardboard and preservation chemicals." "I'll survive." Carmela paused, listening to the background noise on his end. She heard the faint clinking of glass and the muted hum of traffic. "Did you finish your cleanup?" "Mostly." A long pause. She heard the sharp click of a lighter, followed by a heavy exhale. "Dempsey's crew folded faster than I anticipated. A few of his loyalists are currently being convinced to see reason. You're safe where you are." "But I can't leave." "Not today." Carmela looked across the kitchen at her open notebook. "Mr. Costa, I have a question." "Dickon," he corrected quietly. "And go ahead. I'm an auditor. I look at ledgers for a living. I track how money, inventory, and favors move through a system. She picked at a chip in the laminate counter. I understand why you intervened last night. I was a highly convenient excuse to execute a hostile takeover of Victor's territory. You did it publicly, making it a matter of personal disrespect rather than a business grab. It was a brilliant move. I told you as much in the car. Yes, but this part, Carmela said, her voice firming up. Putting me in a safe house, giving me a burner phone, calling to check if I ate. This is bad business. It requires time and attention. I don't offer any strategic value to you anymore. So, why are you doing it? Silence stretched over the line. It lasted so long, Carmela thought he had dropped the call. Do you view the entire world strictly in ledgers, Carmela? Dickon finally asked. His tone was softer now, stripped of the commanding, icy edge he had used in the ballroom. It's the only way things make sense. Everything has a cost. Every action has a measurable reaction. True, Dickon agreed slowly. But sometimes, a man invests in an asset simply because he wants to see how it operates under pressure. You didn't scream last night when Victor was breaking your arm. You didn't cry when I choked him out against a pillar. You didn't panic when I put you in my car. You just calculated. Carmela swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. I was terrified. I know. That's what makes the calculation impressive. He took another drag of his cigarette. Most people in my world are governed entirely by greed or fear. They are predictable. You seem to be governed by logic. It's incredibly refreshing. Consider this safe house a minor operating expense. I can afford it. I don't like owing debts, Carmela said, her grip tightening on the plastic phone. Especially to men who deal in favors. You don't owe me a damn thing. You provided a service last night by standing in front of that Lily arrangement at exactly the right time. We're square. I don't believe you. You don't have to, Dickon replied smoothly, a hint of amusement returning to his voice. Keep eating the frozen pizza, Carmela. I'll call you tomorrow. The line went dead. Carmela slowly lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen before flipping it shut. She walked back to the kitchen table and sat down, pulling the notebook toward her. She stared at the sharp blue line she had accidentally drawn through Dickon's name. He wasn't just a risk variable anymore. He was a puzzle she didn't have the missing pieces to solve. And an auditor without all the data was functionally blind. She grabbed her pen, pressed the tip to the paper, and added a new, heavily underlined item to her list of liabilities. He is interested. 72 hours in the beige house eroded Carmela's sanity faster than she anticipated. She had cataloged every scratch on the linoleum, calculated the cubic square footage of the living room, and successfully identified the exact minute the mail carrier walked past the front window each afternoon. Routine was a poor substitute for freedom. By Wednesday evening, the sky outside had bruised into a deep, heavy purple. Carmela sat at the kitchen table, her spiral notebook completely covered in frantic, tight handwriting. She had mapped out potential escape routes, financial projections for relocating to a new city, and a detailed list of every person Victor Dempsey might have owed money to. It was a coping mechanism. If she could put the danger into a spreadsheet, she could manage the variables. The plastic burner phone buzzed. It was perfectly synchronized with the digital clock on the stove, hitting 6:00 p.m. Carmela picked it up. She didn't bother with a greeting. I'm out of coffee. Drink water, Dickon replied. His voice was clipped. The slow, amused cadence from his previous calls was gone, replaced by the hard, flat tone of a man managing a crisis. "Get your shoes on. The SUV is pulling into your garage in 2 minutes." Carmela stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Why? What happened?" "A statistical anomaly," Dickens said coldly. "Your brother." The line clicked dead. Carmela's stomach plummeted, hitting the floor somewhere near her discarded heels. She didn't waste time panicking. Panic was inefficient. She grabbed her shoes, shoved her feet into them, and snatched Dickens' heavy suit jacket off the counter. Exactly 120 seconds later, the low rumble of the armored SUV vibrated through the floorboards. The door connecting the kitchen to the garage unlocked with a heavy, metallic thunk. Carmela opened it and stepped into the dim light. The same giant of a driver stood holding the rear door open. Carmela climbed in. Dickens was sitting in the back, but he wasn't leaning against the headrest this time. He was leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, staring intently at a glowing tablet in his hands. He wore a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, exposing a faint, faded scar running along the inside of his left wrist. He didn't look up when she closed the door. "What did Thomas do?" Carmela asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Dickens tapped the screen of his tablet, locked it, and tossed it onto the seat beside him. He turned to look at her. The interior streetlights caught the sharp angles of his jaw. He looked dangerous tonight. Not the quiet, calculating danger of the ballroom, but an active, kinetic threat. "Your brother is an opportunist," Dickens stated, his eyes locking onto hers. "Word hit the streets yesterday that Dempsey was exiled. Thomas correctly deduced that Victor wouldn't have had time to empty his local stashes before skipping town." Carmela closed her eyes and pressed the bridge of her nose. "He tried to rob Victor. He tried to rob me," Dickens corrected softly. "Everything that belonged to Victor Dempsey became the property of the Costa family at exactly 11:45 p.m. on Saturday night. Your brother took a crowbar to the back door of a payday loan operation on 4th Street about an hour ago. He managed to get a safe open before my security detail found him." "Is he alive?" Carmela asked. She hated how small her voice sounded. "He is currently breathing," Dickens said. "Whether he continues to do so depends entirely on the next 20 minutes. I'm bringing you to him because I prefer to handle ledgers face to face." The SUV surged forward, leaving the quiet suburban street behind. Carmela stared out the window, watching the neighborhood transition into a bleak industrial sector. Fear warred with a deep, exhausting anger. Thomas had always been a liability. He was a black hole of terrible decisions, and she had spent her entire adult life trying to balance the books he destroyed. "How much did he take?" Carmela asked, staring at her own reflection in the tinted glass. "10,000 in cash," Dickens replied. "But it's not about the money, Carmela. It's about the disruption. He broke into a secure location. He tied up my men for an hour. He insulted the structural integrity of my business. In my world, that requires a public correction." "You mean you have to make an example of him?" "Yes." Carmela turned away from the window to face him. She pulled his oversized jacket tighter around her shoulders, finding a strange comfort in the residual smell of peppermint and wool. "If you wanted him dead, he would be dead," Carmela stated. She refused to let her voice shake. "You wouldn't waste the gas to bring me out here just to watch you shoot my brother. It's an unnecessary dramatic expense. So, what do you actually want?" A faint, grim smile touched the corner of Dickon's mouth. He leaned back against the leather seat, observing her with that same detached, intense appreciation he had shown on the night of the gala. "I want to see how you balance a ledger when the currency is blood," he said. The SUV parked inside a massive, drafty warehouse that smelled heavily of engine oil and damp cardboard. Pallets of unmarked wooden crates were stacked 3 stories high, creating a labyrinth of shadows. Dickon stepped out first, and Carmela followed. The driver stayed by the car, a silent sentinel in the gloom. "Walk with me," Dickon instructed, heading toward a metal staircase that led up to a glass-enclosed office overlooking the warehouse floor. Carmela's cheap shoes clanged against the metal grating. Her chest felt tight, every breath requiring a conscious effort. She didn't know what to expect. Her exposure to violence was limited to movies and the brief, terrifying incident at the gala. Dickon pushed open the heavy steel door to the office. The room was brightly lit by harsh fluorescent tubes. A battered metal desk sat in the center. 2 men in dark coats stood near the back wall, and in a folding chair in the middle of the room sat Thomas. Carmela stopped in the doorway, her breath hitching. Thomas was a mess. His lip was split, bleeding freely down his chin, and his left eye was already swelling shut. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like the terrified, selfish boy he had always been. When Thomas saw Carmela, his good eye widened in a mix of desperate relief and confusion. "Carmela, oh my God, Carmela, tell them. Tell them you know me. Tell them I didn't know." "Shut up, Thomas," Carmela snapped. The command tore out of her throat before she could filter it. Thomas blinked, stunned into silence. Dickon walked past Carmela and leaned against the edge of the metal desk, crossing his ankles. He looked entirely at ease, a stark contrast to the bleeding man in the chair. "Miss Rivera is currently reviewing your file, Thomas," Dickon said mildly. He gestured to Carmela. "The floor is yours." Carmela stepped into the room. She ignored the 2 armed men in the corner. She ignored the coppery smell of blood. She looked directly at her brother. "You broke into a payday loan office," Carmela said, her tone devoid of sisterly warmth. It was the tone she used when confronting a department head about missing funds. "After you owed $50,000 to Dempsey, you thought you could just steal from his corpse." "I was trying to pay him off," Thomas pleaded, straining against the zip ties. "I heard he skipped town. I thought if I grabbed the cash, I could clear the debt with whoever took over. I didn't know it was Costa's place. Carmela, swear to God I didn't know." "Ignorance is not a valid legal or financial defense," Carmela said coldly. She turned to Dickon. "You said he took $10,000. "Correct," Dickon confirmed. "We recovered it. It's sitting in that duffel bag." He pointed to a black canvas bag resting on the floor near the desk. "So the principal amount has been returned," Carmela reasoned, clasping her hands in front of her to stop them from shaking. "The issue is the penalty for the disruption." Dickon tilted his head. "The standard penalty for stealing from my family is a broken hand and a bullet in the knee. It ensures the offender cannot steal or run again. It is highly effective." Thomas let out a pathetic, stifled sob. Carmela didn't look at her brother. She kept her eyes locked on Dickon. She was playing a high-stakes game on a board she barely understood, but she knew the rules of negotiation. You never accept the first offer, and you always find the opponent's pain point. "A bullet in the knee requires cleanup," Carmela stated. Her voice was steady, projecting an absolute authority she did not feel. It requires paying off a doctor. It requires dumping him somewhere. It creates a mess. You're a man who hates messes, Dickon. The two armed guards exchanged a surprised glance. Nobody spoke to Dickon Costa like that. Dickon just watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. Go on. Thomas is a liability to you. If you maim him, he becomes a larger liability. He can't work. He becomes desperate. Desperate men do stupider things, which means you'll eventually have to kill him, which is another mess. Carmela stepped closer to the desk, invading Dickon's space just an inch. I propose an alternative. I'm listening. You absorbed Victor's territory overnight, Carmela said, her brain working furiously. Victor was sloppy. You said it yourself at the gala. He was skimming. If he was skimming, his books are a disaster. He was hiding money from his own crew and from you. Dickon's expression tightened just a fraction. She had hit the nerve. Your men can break kneecaps, Carmela continued, pressing the advantage. But they can't audit a rigged ledger. Give me Victor's books, the real ones. The encrypted files, the paper trails, the shell companies. Give me 3 days. I will find every single dime Victor hid from you. Silence descended heavily on the office. Thomas was staring at his sister like she had grown a second head. Dickon looked down at his shoes, then slowly raised his gaze to meet hers. There was a dangerous magnetic intensity in the room now. It wasn't the threat of violence. It was the friction of two radically different minds calculating the exact same variables. And if you don't find anything? Dickon asked softly. I always find the anomalies, Carmela said, with absolute conviction. I will find the money. That recovered capital will serve as the penalty payment for Thomas's disruption. When I hand you the clean ledgers, my brother's debt is cleared. You let him walk away, and you never touch him. Dickon stood up from the desk. He closed the distance between them until he was standing less than a foot away. Carmela had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. He was an intimidating presence, radiating a quiet, crushing authority. You're offering your professional services to a criminal syndicate, Miss Rivera, Dickon murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. You realize that makes you an accessory. You cross this line, you don't get to go back to being an innocent civilian in a beige house. I stopped being an innocent civilian the second you put me in your car, Carmela whispered back, refusing to break his gaze. Do we have a deal, or do you want to shoot him and clean up the blood? Dickon stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then slowly, a genuine smile broke across his face. It transformed him, erasing the warlord and revealing a man who had just found something incredibly rare. He turned away from her and looked at the guards. Cut him loose. The guards immediately stepped forward, slicing the zip ties off Thomas's wrists. Thomas slumped forward, gasping, rubbing his chafed skin. Get him out of my sight, Dickon ordered, not looking at Thomas. If he sets foot in my territory again, I won't wait for his sister to balance the books. Thomas scrambled to his feet. He looked at Carmela, opening his mouth to speak, but the dead, furious look in her eyes stopped him. He turned and practically ran out the steel door, the guards following him down the stairs. Carmela stood alone in the office with Dickon. The adrenaline crash hit her instantly. Her knees wobbled, and she reached out, gripping the edge of the metal desk to keep herself upright. Dickon watched her sway. He stepped forward and placed a warm, heavy hand on her uninjured shoulder, steadying her. His touch was grounding, anchoring her to the floor. You have 3 days, Dickens said quietly. "I'll have the files delivered to the safe house tomorrow morning. Don't disappoint me, Carmela." "I won't," she managed to say. She had just bought her brother's life, but as she looked up into Dickens' dark, calculating eyes, Carmela realized exactly what it had cost her. She hadn't just audited a ledger. She had written herself onto his payroll. Paperwork smelled like dust and secrets. By Thursday afternoon, the beige living room of the safe house had been entirely transformed into a war room. The ugly microfiber sofa was buried under stacks of printed bank statements. The kitchen counter held a small tower of encrypted hard drives, cracked open by Dickens' technicians and laid bare for Carmela to read. Dickens had delivered the files himself at dawn. He hadn't lingered. He had dropped 2 heavy cardboard banker's boxes on the linoleum, set a brand new laptop on the wobbly kitchen table, and told her the clock was ticking. Carmela didn't sleep. She barely ate. She survived on the bitter, burnt coffee from the pantry and the sheer, propulsive force of her own focus. Victor Dempsey had been a brutal man, but he was a remarkably stupid accountant. He had tried to mask his skimming through a series of shell companies, a laundry service in the South End, a waste management subcontractor, and a phantom logistics firm. But numbers never lied. They just waited for someone smart enough to arrange them in the correct order. By Friday night, Carmela's eyes burned. The harsh blue light of the laptop screen felt like physical pressure against her retinas. She rubbed her temples, tracing a discrepancy in a series of invoices billed to the waste management company. The invoices were for equipment rentals, but the addresses listed for delivery didn't exist on any municipal zoning map. The heavy deadbolt on the garage door clicked. Carmela didn't jump this time. She just kept her eyes on the screen as the door swung open. Dickens walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight. He wore a dark, heavy sweater and dark jeans. It stripped away the corporate veneer of the Mafia boss, leaving only the broad, imposing reality of the man beneath. He walked into the kitchen and set a brown paper bag on the counter. The smell of roasted garlic and real butter instantly overpowered the stale scent of paper and cheap coffee. "You haven't moved in 12 hours, Dickens said. He pulled out a white cardboard container and a plastic fork, setting them on the table right next to her laptop. "I'm working," Carmela replied, not looking up. She tapped the arrow key, scrolling down a column of dates. "I don't have time to stop for dinner." "You have time to eat pasta," Dickens countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If you pass out from low blood sugar, you miss your deadline. Eat." Carmela finally stopped typing. She looked at the container, then up at him. He pulled out one of the cheap kitchen chairs and sat down across from her. He was invading her workspace, forcing a break in her concentration. She opened the carton. It was linguine with clams, still steaming. Her stomach cramped violently, reminding her she had ignored it for 2 days. She took a bite. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Dickens watched her eat. He didn't speak. He just sat in the quiet of the house, his presence massive but entirely still. He picked up a sheet of paper from the stack nearest to him, a printout of a bank transfer log. "You found it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Victor was skimming about 8% off your weekly collections from the docks," Carmela said, after swallowing. She pointed her plastic fork at the paper in his hand. He was funneling it through a shell company called Apex Solutions. They supposedly rented heavy machinery to the Port Authority. The machinery doesn't exist. Dickens' eyes scanned the page. "And the cash? He didn't keep it in the city," Carmela said, leaning forward. The thrill of the hunt overrode her exhaustion. He knew you had eyes on the local banks. He wired it to an offshore account in the Caymans. $3.2 million over the last 14 months. Dickon slowly set the paper down. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. $3 million was a massive insult. It was a failure of his own oversight. "Do you have the routing numbers?" he asked quietly. "I have the routing numbers, the account numbers, and the digital authorization tokens he left saved on his encrypted drive," Carmela said. "I transferred the entire balance into a holding account an hour ago. It's clean. It's untraceable to Victor. I can route it to whatever account you designate." She reached out and turned the laptop screen toward him, displaying a single, glowing line of digits. Balance, 3,245,600. Dickon stared at the screen. He reached out, his large hand resting on the edge of the table. For a long time, the only sound in the house was the loud, metallic clanking of the cheap furnace kicking on. "You did this in 48 hours, Dickon murmured, his eyes finally shifting from the screen to her face. "I told you I find the anomalies," Carmela said, her voice steady. She pushed her empty food container aside. "Thomas's debt is cleared. The penalty for his disruption is paid. We have a deal." Dickon leaned back in his chair. He studied her in the harsh kitchen light. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn for 3 days. Her hair was a messy knot. There were dark, bruised circles under her eyes. She looked absolutely exhausted and completely victorious. "Your brother's debt is cleared," Dickon confirmed, his voice low and raspy. "My men won't touch him. He's officially irrelevant to me." Carmela let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension that had been holding her spine rigid finally snapped. She sank back into her chair, closing her eyes. It was over. She had balanced the ledger. She had survived a collision with a world that usually crushed people like her into dust. "So I can go," she whispered. "You can," Dickon said. Carmela opened her eyes. He was watching her with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. "But we both know you aren't going to," he added softly. Carmela frowned, her defensive instincts flaring instantly. "Excuse me? You can walk out that door right now," Dickon said, his tone conversational but laced with absolute certainty. "I'll have a car take you back to your apartment. You can go back to Mercer Logistics on Monday. You can sit in your cubicle, audit shipping manifests for fractions of a penny, and spend the rest of your life pretending this week never happened." He stood up from the table. He walked around to her side, stopping just a few inches from her chair. He looked down at her, his dark eyes stripping away every layer of pragmatism she used as a shield. "But you'll hate it," Dickon said, "because you just spent the last 2 days playing the real game. You just outsmarted a cartel, secured $3 million, and negotiated a life. Shipping manifests are gonna bore you to death." Carmela looked at his hands, resting casually in the pockets of his jeans. Her heart was beating entirely too fast. "You're arrogant." "I'm observant," he corrected. "You don't belong in the civilian world, Carmela. You have a mind built for war. You see the board clearly when everyone else is panicking. I need that." "You want to hire me," she said flatly. "I want to partner with you," Dickon said. The word hung heavy in the air between them. Not an employee, not an asset, a partner. My organization bleeds money because my capos solve problems with bullets instead of audits. They don't understand the physics of capital. You do. I want you running my books." Carmela let out a short, cynical laugh. "And when I find out one of your captains is skimming, what then? You murder him? I won't be a party to that." Dickon leaned down, placing both hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her. He didn't crowd her violently, but his proximity was suffocating. He smelled like winter air and dangerous decisions. "When you find a rat," Dickon said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble, "you tell me, I remove them. The violence is my burden, Carmela. Your burden is simply telling the truth about the numbers. You keep the books clean. I keep the streets quiet." He was offering her power. Real, tangible power. It wasn't the illusion of safety she had scraped by on for years. It was control. "What if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. "Then the car takes you home. You have my word. I don't force people to sit at my table." Dickon pushed off the chair, giving her space to breathe again. "But I don't think you're going to refuse. You like the math too much." Carmela looked at the laptop screen. $3 million. Reclaimed because she had simply paid attention. She thought of Victor Dempsey, exiled and broken because she had stood in the right place at the right time. Her old life was a ledger filled entirely with liabilities. Thomas's debts, her dead-end job, the constant grinding anxiety of poverty. Dickon Costa was offering her an asset column with no ceiling. She stood up. Her legs were slightly stiff, but she planted her feet firmly on the ugly linoleum floor. She looked Dickon square in the eye. There was no romance here. There were no flowery promises or illusions of a fairy tale ending. This was a transaction between two apex predators who recognized each other in the dark. "I want 15% of any recovered capital from internal audits," Carmela said, her voice turning icy and professional. "I want full autonomy over my department. No one looks at my files without my permission. And you buy me a new desk. I am not working on this wobbly piece of trash." A slow, genuine smile spread across Dickon's face. It was a dangerous look, entirely unbothered and deeply satisfied. "Done," he said. He didn't offer his hand to shake. He didn't need to. The contract was sealed in the shared, cynical understanding of the world they were about to build together. Carmela reached past him, picked up the burner phone off the counter, and dropped it into the trash can. She didn't need it anymore. She wasn't hiding. "Let's get out of this house," Carmela said, grabbing the lapels of his oversized suit jacket she had left draped over the sofa. She slipped it on, letting it swallow her shoulders. "I have millions of dollars to launder, and I desperately need a real cup of coffee." Dickon Costa chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that filled the room. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, opening the door to the dark garage. Carmela walked out first, entirely unafraid of the shadows. Did Carmela's ruthless calculation keep you on the edge of your seat? The underworld is built on bullets, but true power is controlled by those who balance the books. If you loved this deep dive into the pragmatic, high-stakes partnership of Dickon and Carmela, drop a like right now. We want to hear your thoughts. Would you have taken Dickon's deal or walked away back to a normal life? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to hit that share button and subscribe to the channel for more deeply grounded, intense Mafia storytelling.